My grandfather grew more tomatoes off of one short row than most folks grow off of a whole garden today. I am talking about baskets of them. Big, heavy, red tomatoes that you had to hold in two hands, so many that my grandmother was canning quarts of them clear into October and still giving them away over the fence. And here is the part that will stick with you. He never bought a single thing in a plastic bottle to do it. No fancy fertilizer, no miracle spray, no powder from the garden store. Everything he used was already sitting around the place, most of it free, and by the end of tonight, you are going to know every bit of it. So if your tomato plants get tall and green and leafy, but they just will not make you many tomatoes, or the ones they do make rot out on the bottom, or the plant kind of quits on you come August, stay right here with me, because none of that is your fault. Nobody ever taught it to you. They stopped teaching it about the time everything started coming in a bottle. Tonight, we are going to put it back the way it was. Pull up a chair. Let me show you how the old timers grew more tomatoes than they knew what to do with. Now, before we get into the ways, I want to give you the one idea that ties all of it together, because once you understand this, everything else is going to make sense. Here it is. You do not grow a tomato from the top down. You grow it from the ground up. What I mean is this. Most folks today fuss over the part of the plant they can see. They spray the leaves, they pick at the vine, they worry over every yellow spot. But my grandfather never paid much mind to the top of the plant at all. He built the bottom of it, he built the roots, and he built the ground those roots lived in. A tomato plant with a big, deep root system in rich living soil will feed itself, water itself through a dry spell, and set fruit like it is trying to win a prize. A tomato plant with shallow little roots and poor, tired dirt will fight you all summer no matter what you spray on it. So everything I am about to tell you comes back to that one idea. Feed the roots and the ground, and the tomatoes take care of themselves. All right, let us start where my grandfather started, and it is the first thing and the most important thing. So if you only remember one, remember this one. The first old way is to plant them deep, deeper than you would ever think. When most folks set out a tomato plant, they dig a little hole just big enough for the pot, and they set the plant in there at the same level it was growing, and they pat it down. My grandfather would have shook his head at that. He planted a tomato so deep that 2/3 of the plant went underground. He would take a plant that was, say, a foot tall, and he would pinch off all the bottom leaves, leave just the top little cluster, and he would bury the whole rest of that stem. Now, here is why, and this is the secret. A tomato is not like other plants. All up and down that fuzzy stem, if you put it under dirt, every one of those little hairs turns into a root. So when you bury 8 inches of stem, you are not losing the plant, you are growing 8 inches of brand new roots. You end up with a root system 3 or 4 times the size of what the fella down the road has got. And a plant with that many roots can pull up water and food from way down deep where the little shallow plants cannot reach. That is your whole summer right there. Now, if your ground is rocky or hard and you cannot dig straight down, the old timers had a trick for that too. They call it trench planting. You dig a shallow trench, lay the plant down on its side in there, bury the stem sideways, and just let the top curve up out of the ground toward the sky. Give it a day, and that top will stand right up on its own. Same idea. All that buried stem turns to root, but it works even where you have got no depth to dig. Either way, deep or sideways, you bury that stem. Do not set a tomato shallow. That is mistake number one, and it is the one everybody makes. The second old way is what my grandfather put in the hole before the plant ever went in. Now, this is where folks lean in, because this is the part that forgot the hardest. Every hole got a handful of things, and every one of them had a job. First, crushed eggshells. My grandmother saved them all winter in a coffee can on the windowsill, and by spring she had plenty. He would crush up a good handful and put them right in the bottom of the hole. Eggshells are calcium, and calcium is the one thing a tomato has got to have to keep from rotting out on the bottom end. That rotten spot on the bottom of a tomato, the one that goes brown and sunk in, that is called blossom end rot, and it is nothing but the plant not getting enough calcium at the right time. The eggshells fix it before it ever starts. Next, he put in a scoop of old rotted manure or compost, whatever was broke down and black and crumbly from the pile. That is the food. Not fresh, mind you. Never fresh. It has got to be aged till it does not smell anymore. That is what feeds the plant slow and steady all season long. Then, and this one folks always get a kick out of, he put a fish in the hole. An old fish head, the guts, whatever was left from cleaning a mess of fish down at the creek. The Indians taught the old settlers that one hundreds of years ago, and it never quit working. A fish buried under a tomato plant rots down and feeds it about everything it needs. Now, if you are not a fishing man, a spoon of bone meal from the store does the same job, but the fish is free. He would put in a banana peel too, laid right in the bottom. A banana peel is potassium, and potassium is what helps a plant make flowers and fruit instead of just leaves. And a spoonful of old wood ashes from the stove for the same reason, plus a little Epsom salt if he had it, which is magnesium, and that keeps the leaves green and working. He would stir all that into the bottom of the hole with a little dirt so it would not burn the roots. Set his deep planted tomato right on top of it and fill it in. That plant had a full pantry underneath it before it ever grew an inch. You do that, and you have done more than any bottle of fertilizer will ever do for you. The third old way is how he watered. And this one is where most folks lose their tomatoes without even knowing they are doing it. My grandfather watered deep, and he watered seldom. He did not come out every evening with a little sprinkle. He knew a little sprinkle every day is about the worst thing you can do, because it keeps all the roots up at the top of the ground looking for that easy water. And then the first hot, dry spell comes, and those shallow roots cook, and the plant wilts. Instead, he watered hard, a good long soak that went way down deep, and then he left it alone for the better part of a week. That taught the roots to chase the water down, and a deep root never goes thirsty. And he watered the ground, never the plant. He would water right at the base, down at the dirt, and keep it off the leaves entirely. Wet leaves in the evening is how a tomato gets every disease there is. Water the roots in the morning if you can, so the ground drinks it up before the heat of the day. Now, here is the thing about even watering that I want you to hear, because it saves you two of the biggest heartaches. You know how a tomato will split right open with a big crack around the top? And you know that blossom end rot we talked about, the brown bottom? Both of those, nearly every time, come from the water going up and down, dry, then flooded, then dry again. The plant gets no water for a week and then gets a gully washer, and the fruit swells too fast and splits, or it could not pull up calcium during the dry part and it rots. Keep that water even and deep and steady, and most of your tomato troubles just disappear. You will think you got a whole new garden, which leads me right into the fourth old way, and that is mulch. This one does half the work for you while you sit on the porch. After the plants were up a little and the ground was good and warm, my grandfather would lay down a thick blanket of mulch all around them. Straw, old spoiled hay, grass clippings dried out, leaves he saved from the fall, whatever he had, thick, now, 3 or 4 inches, right up around the plant, but not touching the stem. And that mulch did about 4 jobs at once. It held the water in the ground, so it did not dry out between soakings, which keeps that even moisture we just talked about. It kept the weeds from ever coming up, so he was not out there fighting weeds all summer. It kept the ground cool down at the roots in the worst of the heat. And this last one is the sneaky important one. When it rains, that mulch keeps the dirt from splashing up onto the bottom leaves of the plant, because that splashing dirt is exactly how the soil diseases get up onto your tomato and start killing it from the bottom. A good thick mulch is like a roof over your soil. Lay it down, and half your problems never even show up. The fifth old way is pruning, and it is nothing but pinching with your fingers, but you have got to know where to pinch. Two things here. First, the suckers. In between the main stem and every branch, down in that armpit of the plant, a little new shoot will start to grow. That is a sucker. If you let every one of them go, your plant turns into a giant green jungle that puts all its strength into growing more and more vine and precious few tomatoes. My grandfather pinched those suckers out while they were little, just snapped them off with his thumbnail so the plant would quit growing so much bush and start making fruit. You do not get every single one, but you keep it thinned out. Second, he stripped off all the leaves on the bottom foot of the plant, right up off the ground. Those bottom leaves never do much good down there in the shade, and they are the first ones to catch disease from the soil splashing up. Take them off and let the air move under there. Air moving through a tomato plant is what keeps it dry and keeps it healthy. A open, pruned plant with air running through it will outlast a crowded jungle every time. But do not go crazy and strip the whole thing now. The plant needs its leaves up top to shade the fruit from sun scald and to feed itself. Just the suckers and the bottom foot. That is all. The sixth old way is about feeding, and it is really about knowing when to quit feeding one thing and start feeding another. Here is the mistake, and it is the most common one there is. Folks buy a big bag of fertilizer that is heavy in nitrogen, the stuff that grows things green and fast, and they pour it on their tomatoes all season. And they get the prettiest, tallest, greenest, bushiest tomato plants in the county and hardly a tomato on them. All vine and no maters, my grandfather called it, because nitrogen grows leaves. Once a tomato starts to flower, it does not want much more nitrogen. It wants potassium and phosphorus, the things that make flowers and fruit and roots. So the old timers fed different as the season went. Early on, a little something green to get it growing. But once those yellow flowers showed up, he backed off the rich stuff and gave it wood ashes and a little bone meal and that Epsom salt tea, the things that push fruit instead of leaf. And his feeding was gentle and steady. A little compost tea every couple weeks, not a big shock all at once. Manure tea he made in a bucket, just aged manure and water let to sit. And he would pour that weak brown water right at the roots. Slow, steady, gentle food. That is how you get a plant loaded down with fruit instead of a big green bush. The seventh old way is to hold them up off the ground and to do it early. A tomato plant wants to lay right down on the ground and sprawl. And if you let it, every tomato that touches that dirt is going to rot or get eaten by a slug or catch a disease. My grandfather staked or caged every plant, and he did it the day he planted, not later. Because if you wait until the plant is big and floppy to try and stake it, you break half the branches getting it up there. He used tall stakes, tied the plant up loose with strips of old rags, never wire or string that would cut into the stem as it swelled. Soft cloth, tied in a loose figure eight so it had room to grow, kept the plant up in the air in the sun, kept the fruit clean and off the ground, kept the air moving. A held up tomato is a healthy tomato. The eighth old way is a little thing that makes a big difference, especially in a hot summer. And that is helping your tomatoes set their fruit. Now, a tomato flower pollinates its own self. It does not need bees the way some things do. What it needs is a little shake. Out in the open, the wind does it, jiggles those flowers, and knocks the pollen loose, so it sets a fruit. But in a still, muggy spell, or if your plants are up against the house out of the wind, those flowers just sit there and never set, and then they turn yellow and drop off and you get nothing. So the old timers would go down the row every few days and just give each plant a little flick or a shake, tap the stake it was tied to, and that shaking sets the fruit. And here is the other half of it. When it gets up over about 95 degrees in the worst of the summer, tomato flowers quit setting altogether. The pollen just goes no good in that heat. That is why your plant stops making in a heat wave. There is not a lot you can do about the weather, but a little afternoon shade cloth over them in the worst of it, or planting where they get some relief from that late day sun, will keep them setting fruit right through a hot spell when your neighbors have quit. The ninth old way is about what you plant next to what and where you plant it year to year. The old timers did not have a name like companion planting. They just knew certain things grew good together. Basil planted right in among the tomatoes. They swore it made them taste better, and it does keep some of the bugs off. Marigolds all down the row. Those bright orange flowers, they keep the nematodes and a lot of pests out of the ground. So my grandmother lined the whole tomato patch with them. But some things they kept well apart. They never planted tomatoes right next to the potatoes because they take the same diseases and one will give it to the other. And the big one, they never planted tomatoes in the same spot 2 years running. This is called rotation, and it is one of the most important things there is. The diseases and the bugs that go after tomatoes, they winter over right there in that ground. And if you plant tomatoes in the same dirt next year, you are setting them down right on top of last year's trouble. So every year the tomato patch moved to fresh ground. And the old spot grew beans or corn or something else for a few years to let it rest and clean itself out. Move your tomatoes around. That one habit will save you more grief than any spray ever will. The 10th old way is how my grandfather finished the season and got the most out of every plant right up to the frost. Come late summer, along about the middle of August, he would do something that looks wrong until you understand it. He would cut the top out of every tomato plant, top them right off. Now, why would a man cut the top off a plant that is still growing? Because by mid-August, any new flower that sets is not going to have time to grow up and ripen before the frost gets it anyhow. So all that energy the plant is spending reaching for the sky and making new little flowers up top is being wasted. Cut that top out, and the plant quits growing tall and pours everything it has got into ripening the tomatoes it already made. You get bigger, faster ripening fruit off the bottom instead of 100 little green ones that never come to anything. And when the first frost is finally coming and there's still green tomatoes on the vine, do not let them freeze and rot. Pick every one of them, even the green ones. Wrap them each in a piece of newspaper and lay them in a box in a cool room, or hang the whole plant upside down in the cellar, and those green tomatoes will ripen up slow over the next month or two. My grandmother had ripe tomatoes off the vine at Thanksgiving that way, long after the garden was dead and gone. Nothing wasted. That is the old way through and through. Now let me give you one more, a bonus, because it is the one that made my grandfather's tomatoes better every single year. And it is the one almost nobody does anymore. He saved his own seed. Every summer, he would find the very best plant in the patch, the healthiest one that made the most and the biggest tomatoes and never got sick. And he would let one perfect tomato on that plant get dead ripe, and he would save the seed out of it for next year. Year after year after year, always saving from the best. And what happens when you do that is those seeds slowly become perfectly suited to your dirt, your weather, your mountain. After 10 or 20 years, he had a tomato that grew for him like it grew for nobody else because it had learned his ground. You cannot buy that in a packet. You grow it 1 year at a time. If you do nothing else different, start saving seed from your best plant this year, and in a few years, you will have something special. So let me tie it all back up for you. and give you the one thing to do this week if you do not do anything else. Everything comes back to that first idea. You grow a tomato from the ground up, feed the roots and feed the dirt, and the plant will pour out tomatoes. So this week, whatever stage your plants are at, go do these 3 things. Lay down a thick mulch around every plant if you have not already, because that alone fixes the even watering and half the diseases. Give them a deep, slow soak at the roots instead of a little daily sprinkle, and pinch out the suckers and strip the bottom foot of leaves to get the air moving. 3 things, all free, all this week. Your plants will thank you inside of 2 weeks. I promise you that. And if you are just now fixing to set out plants, then plant them deep, bury that stem, and put the old timer's pantry down in the hole first. The eggshells, the compost, the banana peel, a little bone meal, or a fish if you have got one. Do that, and you have set that plant up to feed itself all summer long. None of this is hard. None of it costs much of anything. It is just the way it was done before we all got talked into believing we needed to buy something for every little thing. The old timers grew more food out of a little patch of mountain ground than most folks grow today with a shed full of products. And now you know how they did it. Now I want to hear from you. So do me a favor and tell me down in the comments, what did your people grow in their garden? And what is the one tomato secret that got handed down in your family? Maybe it is something I never even heard of. I read every single one of them, and I learn something new from you all every week. If this helped you, and I hope it did, subscribe and sit with us a while here at the Old Mountain Way, because we are keeping the old ways alive one at a time, and there is always a place for you here. You take care now, and I will see you next time.